Okay, so in this unit, we're going to look at linear relationships and linear trends. And linear trends are just certain patterns we see in data, and we'll learn more about them as we do some examples. So the first example is to observe the growth or behavior patterns. Scientists measure and tag birds and other animals. Mario measures the height and wingspan of 12 geese. He wonders if there is a trend in the relationship between two variables that will allow him to make a reasonable prediction of the wingspan when he knows the height. So if you look at the data here, he has the height of a number of different geese in centimeters, and then he has their wingspan in centimeters. And he wants to know, basically, is there a pattern between the height of the bird and its wingspan? So describe how you set up the axis of the graph to display the data. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a graph that represents all of this data to see if we can find a pattern. So the axes are the two lines. Let's try something darker. We have the y-axis, which is the one that goes up and down or vertically, and we have the x-axis, and that's the one that moves horizontally. Okay, so y and x. And basically what it's asking is, what data are we going to put on the x-axis and what data are we going to put on the y-axis? So on the y-axis, we put something called the dependent variable. And on the x-axis, we put something called the independent variable. So what we say is that what goes on the y-axis, the dependent variable, depends on the independent variable, what goes on the x-axis. So in this case, we want to know, does the wingspan depend on the height? So that means the wingspan is the independent variable, which we will put here, and the height is the dependent variable. So we'll put that here. So when we make our graph, we're going to put the height along the x-axis and the wingspan along the y-axis. So whenever you're trying to figure it out, say the statement, what depends on what? So in this case, we're trying to decide, does the wingspan depend on the height of the bird? So that makes the wingspan the dependent variable, because we're trying to figure out if it depends on something. Okay, so create a scatter plot to plot this data. So we did scatter plots a little bit in the last section, and this is what the scatter plot would look like. So what we did is we took each piece of data. So for example, height 77 and wingspan 129. Well, that's this right here. So it's right around, it's just above 75, so that would be 77, and it's just under 130, so 129. And we took each point and we plotted it on this graph. And it says, what do you notice about the points? And generally, they are moving, as they move to the right, they are moving up. And that's what they want us to recognize here, is as the points are moving to the right, they're also moving up. And that will help us talk a little bit about what actually is happening with the data. So describe the trend in the relationship between the two variables. So is it positive or negative, or is there no trend? So we call this a positive trend, because as the independent variable, the height, increases, so does the dependent variable, the wingspan. So it's going up as it goes to the right. So it is a positive trend. Then we're asked to draw a line of best fit. And what a line of best fit is a line through the data. Let's bring in a definition here. So it's a straight line that represents a trend in the scatter plot. So what it does is it cuts through the data, and it represents the pattern as well as possible. So we can't draw a straight line and hit all of these points. They're too all over the place. But we can draw a line that kind of cuts right through the middle of these points that best represents the trend. So if I'm to draw a line of best fit, let's see what I can do here. All right. It's going to look something like this. Kind of like that. So you can see it cuts through a lot of the clusters of points, and it kind of gives us an idea of what the data might follow. So then it says, use the graph to predict the wingspan of a goose that is 1 meter tall. So we should note that everything here is in centimeters, and 1 meter is 100 centimeters. So height is on the x-axis, so there's 100 centimeters or 1 meter. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to follow it up till I hit the line, which is there, and then I'm going to come across. And it's right between 165 and 170, so I'm going to say the wingspan is maybe about 167 centimeters. Okay? And that's how we can use a scatter plot to determine a linear trend and make decisions and assumptions based on that scatter plot.